So this is what we talked about yesterday. The last thing that we were discussing was this quick recap of some of the things. Depending upon which database you're connecting to, or depending upon how you're going ahead with connecting the database, you might use one of these different libraries. System.data.sql client is the managed provider for SQL Server. That's the one that we're going to be using. If the database did not have a managed provider, then the other options through which you can connect to the database are either through OLEDB or through ODBC. But preferably use the managed provider of the database. Every provider that you're using would have a similar structure. So the names of the classes would be similar in other providers also. So in SQL Server, the topmost class is called SQL connection, that allows you to connect to a database. Secondly, if you want to insert, update or delete records, then just for doing that much, the SQL command is more than sufficient, and that's all that you'll need. But if you have to return records, if you have to read the records, then one of the options available to you is SQL data reader. We use three terms to describe the SQL data reader. It was connected, forward only, and read only way of reading the records, also called as a firehose cursor. So this is where we have stopped off yesterday. We have created a database yesterday. So let's today try to connect to the database from our code. Okay. I'm going in for a new project. I'm still creating a console app. I'm not changing that. Are we on day 12 today?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And I'm just calling this as database code. So the first thing that I need to do is give a using on system.data, right? And system.data.sql client. So these are the two namespaces which contain, the code for the classes that we are going to be working with. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, from main, I'm going to call different functions. And so these would do a certain task. Like, for example, I want to first connect to the database. Right? To connect to the database, which object would we need? Which object would we need here to connect to the database?
SQL connection.
SQL connection. So let's try creating an object of type SQL connection. SQL connection CM is equal to new SQL connection. Now, the connection object has a property called as connection string. Okay, the connection has a property called connection string. And if you know it, then of course you give the connection string. But if you don't know it, then how do you find what is the connection string for your database? If you go into the SQL Server Object Explorer, right? So look carefully so that you know how to do this on your own also. And open the database that we had created yesterday, right? So we had created one called JK July 22. So if you open this, right click on this and go into the properties. So in the right hand side, it shows you the properties for that connection, all the properties for that connection. And one of the properties there is the connection string. Okay, this is one of the properties there, the connection string. So I'm just copy pasting from here, right? I'll repeat what I'm saying. I'm saying from here, right click and go into properties and look out for the property called connection string. Now, that's what we are going to be using while connecting to our code. So I'll just paste it here. And this contains a lot of details, which I'll eliminate some of the things. Firstly, there's a slash out here. You remember the way of eliminating that? What can you do to eliminate the problem with the slash? One of two ways.
You
Mentioning
can
at
give
the rate.
double slash.
Double slash or at the rate
At the rate.
before this begins. Okay. So look at the first option here. What do you think this is? Data source is equal to something. What do you think this is? Do you remember that MS SQL local DB? What are that?
Database name.
Database name.
Correct. The name of the SQL server. It's not the database name. Database name is separate. Database name is what we gave later as JK July 22. But this here is the name of the SQL server that you are connecting to. If you are connecting over a network, then the name of that SQL server database on that machine, whatever the name, that is the one that you'll be connecting to. With the IP address, you might have to give that. Okay. Secondly, initial catalog equal to. So here, this is the database name. Inside SQL Server, you'll be creating databases. So if you remember, the first step that we did was we created a database with the same name. So that's my initial catalog. Okay. Now the third information here is how are you connecting to SQL Server? What is the authentication that you're giving? You have two modes of authentication in SQL Server. You have something called as Windows authentication, and you have SQL Server authentication. With Windows authentication, it takes the login name and password of the currently logged in user in Windows. So when we say integrated security equal to true, we are using Windows authentication, and I have logged in onto my machine as an administrator. So it's getting the rights of an administrator. So SQL Server, while installing, can be configured. What authentication mode do you want to use? Do you want to use Windows, or do you want to use the other mode, which I'll talk about? Or do you want to use both? So when you install Visual Studio, the SQL Server that you have installed by default comes in installed with Windows authentication only. And that's the authentication mode that we're giving. Integrated security equal to true is an example of Windows authentication, where it says that the username and password is the current logged in Windows user. I don't have to give it again. Okay. Then you have connect timeout. Any guesses what this could be? Connect timeout. Connect timeout. What could it be?
To database.
If you cannot connect in this time, then it will give you an error saying that the operation was timed out. So how long do you want to keep trying? Is your connect timeout. Okay. And then the other options you can ignore. In fact, even connect timeout you can ignore. I don't need these. All of these are, not required here. So these are the three that are essential: data source, initial catalog, and security information. The other alternative that you could have had, okay, the other alternative that you could have had, what you could have said something like this: instead of initial catalog equal to so and so, you could have said user ID equal to the user ID and password equal to the password. So assuming you had configured, this is called as SQL Server authentication. With SQL Server authentication, in SQL Server, you will have to define users and their rights. And this is how you can connect to the SQL Server. So the first option there, user ID, is the login name in SQL Server. And password, of course, is the password. So for our SQL Server, this is not configured. So we are not using this, but be aware of this, that these are the two possible ways of connecting to SQL Server. I'm keeping the one that was initial catalog equal to, and I'm so sorry, I changed the wrong one. I should be I change the initial catalog. What should I be changing actually is the integrated security. So user ID equal to SA and password is equal to SA. All right, that's what we're doing. Now to check whether it's working or not, I'm going to do a cn.open, right? And put this into a try catch block. So if it doesn't open for whatever reason, you know why it doesn't open. Right? If for whatever reason it doesn't open, then you would know why it's not open. Now, what could be one of the reasons out here? Let's say, for example, I gave this wrong. So my initial catalog is wrong. So it's not able to give the name of the database out here. And I'm trying to open this. Now this is going to give me an error. So let's try connect. Right. So it's going to give me an error here because I cannot find that initial catalog. So it's going to, in a short while, give this. Cannot open the database requested, the login failed for so and so. What is this actually? This is the username that I'm using on my Windows system, right? All right. Now, I know what the error is, of course. I've purposely introduced that. What if it has worked? Okay, what if it has worked? I mean, I could then check for something like this. If cn dot and then you have the state of the connection, right? And you could actually check for something like this, whether it's still connecting, whether it is open, whether it is closed, all right? Whether it's in the middle of fetching records, all right? All of these things you can check for. So here I'm just simply doing this. So just be aware of there's something called connection state, which tells you what is the state of the connection. So in that case, I'm doing a cn dot close. Okay. So this is my connect. This is how I'm actually connecting to your database. Let's try running this, and now with the correct connection, this is giving me a success, and then I'm closing the connection. Remember, whatever connections you open, you must close them, right? Otherwise, you'll run out of connections at some point of time. Okay. So we've tried connecting to the database. Next step that we're going to try and do is actually run some commands. So I'm going to try an insert command. Okay, I'm going to try to insert a value out here. Each of these methods I'm going to keep separate. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the code. It's not that I'm connecting first and then inserting later. I'm going to have each, option out here functional by itself. Okay, I don't need this. Let's assume that this is open. What are the next thing that we'll be doing here is creating a SQL command. So let's do that. SQL command cmd insert is equal to new SQL command. All right. Now, the first thing that you need to say is that what is the connection that this one is using? So the SQL command here is using cn as its connection. Cn, of course, is your connection object. The second thing that you'll need to specify is what type of command is this? So there's a property here called command type, and this is actually an enum. Are you using some text? Are you giving a SQL statement out here? Or are you giving a stored procedure out here? Or are you giving something, SQL Server supports something called table direct, where you can just give the name of the table. Right now, we're not going to use that table direct. That is an older way of coding. We're not going to use that. You would either be writing a SQL statement yourself, or you would be writing a stored procedure. The preferred option is to use a stored procedure. Wherever possible, you should be using a stored procedure because stored procedures work faster. They're compiled code, they're already there on the database, and they're reusable code. So you don't have to rewrite that all over again. So your first choice should be always a stored procedure. And if you don't have a stored procedure, then go in for a text, command text. In the first example, I don't have a stored procedure, so I'm going to go in for command text, and we're going to actually give in your own SQL statement here. So cmd insert dot next, of course, is the command text, and this would be your insert statement out here. I think I have 3 or 4 records out there. Okay. Let me quickly check that. I think I added 3 yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so I got record up to record number 3. Let me just right now just hard code this value and just try this out. So this is what I want to actually do, 4, and then employee name. Okay, the next name that I see there is Ganesh. Basic salary and department number. Okay, assuming this is your command text that you had. And then finally, to run the command, okay, you have a method called execute non-query. So the first method that we're going to talk about. This is typically used for queries that don't return a value, like an insert or an update or a delete. These are not returning a value. Your select, on the other hand, would be returning a value. So if you had queries that don't return a value, action queries that don't return a value, you would use command.execute non-query. Execute non-query returns an integer. This tells you how many rows were affected. So for example, if you're inserting a row, then how many rows would be affected would be 1. Or if you're doing an update and let's say 2 rows were affected, then the return value here would be 2. So execute non-query returns the number of rows affected. I don't need the return value here. Let me just call execute non-query to run my code. All right. And of course here console.writeLine, this was okay. Otherwise, if it given exception, then what would happen? In that case, it will go into the catch and show you why the exception occurred. Right. So let's try and insert. Right, and this got inserted. What should I actually be doing out here? What have I not done? What have I missed out on doing?
Connection close.
Connection close. And that could come in your finally, whether the command worked or not. We'd like to do a cn.close. Or you can put it into a using block. What would happen if you put the connection in the using block? What happens when you put a using block?
So it would automatically dispose the connection.
It would automatically dispose the connection. So for keeping it simple, I'm just putting it like this, but you could be putting a using block out there. Right? So this is what we're doing. Now, right now, if I run this command again, obviously it's going to give me an exception. Why? Why would it give me an exception here again?
Because employee is primary key.
Right. So it shows you the exception message. Right. It's a violation of the primary key constraint. So if an exception occurs, don't panic. Don't say, okay, my code is not working. Read what the exception message is, understand the exception message, and solve the problem. Okay, don't say, sir, problem. All right. Instead of hard coding the values here, I'm going to pass this as an employee object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called employee. I have some code which has this class. So I'm going to actually create an object of that class and pass it from here. Okay. Right. Okay, let's say employee number 5. And to this insert, I would, I'll have a employee object as a parameter, EMP, OBJ, whatever you want to call it, and pass this OBJ as a parameter. What I want to do different here is receive an object of that employee class and insert the values from there. So no hard coding values. What could you suggest now? What could you suggest now? Instead of this, what do you do now? Instead of 4, what is this now?
obj dot
Right.
ID.
So can I use something like
String
this?
interpolation.
Can I use something like this? What is this called? Yeah, I've got the answer already. Okay. Instead of Ganesh, what do we have? Obj dot name. Instead of this, we have obj dot basic, and instead of this, we have obj dot department. So these are the things that we had out here, right? And let's try running the same code, but this time, what is the difference now here? I'm passing a employee object as a parameter, and I'm actually reading the values from this. So made my code a little more flexible. And again, the same thing. Now this works. I mean, the code was working fine. There's no problem with this code. Okay. Now the only problem with string concatenation is that if you have some values that have special characters, this causes a problem. Like in this case, what would happen if I, had the name containing D'Souza, which contains a single quote in here? What would be the issue here? What would be the issue here? Yes.
So it will take just half the name.
The name already has, since it's enclosed in single quotes, there's a beginning single quote here, and the name contains a single quote. So moment it encounters a single quote, it will terminate there and there itself. So just to show you what will happen, console.writeLine, command insert dot command text. Okay. Just to show you what is happening there and why it's giving a problem. So let's try the same thing. I would have had 5. Let me insert this as number 6. Right. And see the statement that it has created. So because of the string concatenation, look at the name. So it's single quote D, single quote close again. So what happens after that is not recognizable. It's not able to understand that as SQL. Right. So this That's the error that is showing. Incorrect syntax near the word Sousa. Unclosed quotation marks after the character string so and so. So whenever you have values that contain special characters, string concatenation is a problem. It fails. Okay. Another problem that you face with string concatenation is the possibility of SQL injection, wherein if you're accepting a value from the user can, through this string value that you are accepting, and if you're concatenating it, through the string value, he can actually insert some SQL. He enters SQL in the value that he's entering. And if he's a smart hacker who's trying to get into your system, using SQL injection, he can enter your system and cause great damage. So string concatenation has two problems. What are the two problems? First one is the problem with special characters. Second problem, and which is a more serious problem, is what? The possibility of an SQL injection attack. Now, both these problems are resolved if instead of using string concatenation, you use parameters. So by using parameters, your code would work for special characters and it will also handle SQL injection. Okay, we are running way short of time. Otherwise, I would have spent 15-20 minutes explaining to you how SQL injection works. Right. And you know, there's a very interesting story also in one of my earlier training, not now, but almost 10 years back, 12 years back. I was talking about this topic, and then immediately after that, somebody had to, you know, log on to the Indian Airlines site to book a ticket. And he tried SQL injection and it worked. So that's a different story altogether for a different day. Maybe when we are a little more relaxed, I'll tell you that story. But SQL injection is a problem out here. So instead of using this out here, I'm going to actually use parameters. Okay. And let's see how this problem can be sorted out. So I'm just going to copy paste this code and make a few changes in it. Okay. So how would the code look now? You would not use string concatenation. Instead, check this out. Insert into employees values @ employee number. And this @ employee number is an example of a parameter. Similarly, @ name. The parameters, by the way, can have any names. It doesn't have to be @ employee number, @ name. It can be @x, @y. The only prerequisite, it begins with a @ basic and @ department. So what are all four of these? These are parameters. So your insert statement now has these parameters, and then you have to specify what are the values for this parameter. So the command object has a collection called parameters. Whenever you see something ending in S, you know it's a collection, right? So parameters, how do you add a parameter? Any collection, what are the 3 light bulbs that should go on your head? When I see the word collection, what is
count.
Add
add
remote
remove count. So here also, how do we add a parameter? Parameters dot
add.
Okay. Now there is an option of parameters dot add, and there is one more option of parameters dot add with value. So I'm going to use the add in a later example, but for this example, I'm using add with value. So I'm saying command insert dot parameters dot add with value. The parameter name here is @ employee number, and the value in there is what? What value should I put in there? What value would this contain?
obj.embl.
Correct. So obj.employee number. Similarly, repeat this for all the 4 parameters. So it's like @employee number, you have @name, @basic, and @department number. Just correct the all right. So this is what we have done. Now the same employee, instead of calling insert, we're going to be passing insert with parameters, and parameters would handle the problem of the special characters that are being taken out. So let's try this out. And Mr. D'Souza is now in our database. Are we clear on this? Everybody? Questions, if any? All right. Now, so far we've been trying out, creating or rather writing code by, just simply calling the SQL. So we are forming the SQL every time. I said right at the start that a better way would be to use stored procedures. So stored procedures will firstly be more efficient, would be faster, would be pre-compiled code, and would be reusable code. So you don't need to write that statement over and over again. So let's see how we can create a stored procedure in SQL Server. Let's go to SQL Server. And again, please note this because you'll have to do this on your own. Note the steps. Go to programmability. Under programmability, there is stored procedures. In SQL Server, just like you have tables, you have programmability. Under programmability, you have stored procedures. Right click and add a new stored procedure. Right? Add a new stored procedure. So it shows you the syntax for this. So create procedure, procedure name. I'm calling this as insert employee. Procedure name is insert employee. And as what? As what? What is this? What have I given out here?
Parameter names.
This is the actual SQL statement.
Yes.
With the parameter
names.
Now it's showing me an error because I have not defined the parameters. So just in the first section here is where you define your parameters, starting with, let's say, @employee number, which is of type int. If it had a default value, you can give a default value, but if you don't want to give a default value, you omit it. Okay, this is the default value for a parameter. Employee number, then what else we had? @name, which was of type varchar 50. @basic, which was of type decimal 18,2, and these would generally match the values that you're given in your table. And @department number, which was an int. So these are the things that we have done out here. Okay. I'll just copy paste that statement into the chat window. Right. So just keep that with you all, and then you can use it as a reference if you want. What are the 2 ways possible now in which you create this stored procedure? First possibility, just like yesterday, what could you do? You could click on this update button, right? You could do this update and then, click on update database. But as I said yesterday, that sometimes, it doesn't immediately happen. It hangs, right? If sometimes there's not enough memory, if it's a slower machine, if SQL Server is running slow, different possibilities exist. So I am going to do update database here, but I have also shown you the other way of how to get over this, which is what would you do? What would you do? Right click, new query, given the actual query here, and run the query out here. So this is the other way in which you've done this. Okay. All right. So once my update has successfully completed, come back here. And if you check your stored procedures now. Your stored procedure insert employee has been created. So let's go and call this in our code. So rather than write SQL out here, we're going to be actually working with this stored procedure. Let me make a copy of this code. Right, and let me call that insert with stored procedure. All right, now let's focus on the code. Can you all identify line by line what are the first change that we'll need to make? First change. Starting from the top, what do you think will be the first change that we'll need to make here? Which line number? Which line?
Command type 115.
Correct. So command type we had given as text, and text should be given when you're giving it as your own SQL out here. So instead of command type, now this changes to stored procedure. The second change that you'll have to give is the command text itself. You won't be giving in the SQL here. Instead, you'll be giving the name of the stored procedure. So my stored procedure was called insert employee. Right? So that's the second change that you have made out. The remaining code is identical. So that stored procedure also had parameters. I've added those parameters. To run the command, you were still using execute non-query. So that part also is the same. So these are the two changes that you need to make here when you're calling a stored procedure. First is command type, set it as stored procedure instead of text. And secondly, in the command text, you given the name of the stored procedure. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now going ahead in our training, everything that you're going to be doing, I would like you to do this with a stored procedure. Do not use command type.text. Do not use that. All examples that I'm doing with y'all, I would like y'all to try it out with a stored procedure. I may not do it. I might quickly type out the code. But I would, when you're trying it out, you try it with the stored procedure. So you have enough practice of calling a stored procedure. So let's run this and see how this works. So I'm sorry, this will not work. Why? Why will this not work? Because I already have that record has been
Primary key violation.
Yeah. So let me in the primary key. Other things, of course, will work fine. And this worked okay. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any? All right. So here's a to-do for you. Right. I would like you to write down the stored procedures for update and delete, update employee and delete employee, and call them from your code out here. It will be very similar to what you're doing with insert. So can you tell me the what will be the command text that you will give? What will be the update statement that will give? Can you read? Somebody call that out to me. Yes.
Update employee.
Give me the whole thing. No breaks in between. Give me the whole thing. Update employee is what? Ahead of that, what? Fill in the blanks thing. You have to fill in the blanks.
So update employee set, let's say basic equal to, so I'm actually finding it difficult to distinguish between SQL query and this query.
So write down I'll show you what I did for insert. This is the query I wrote for insert. Now give me the code for update. This is also an SQL query. This is not an SQL query. This is an SQL query.
Update
Yes.
employees.
Yes.
Set @basic.
No, not
Basic
set.
equal to.
No, not set @basic.
Set
@basic is the
equal
value.
to. Yes, sir. Set basic equal to @basic, where
Put a comma. All the values to be updated.
yes, where
No, not where. All the columns to be updated.
all the columns. Okay. So name equal to @name. Department number equal to department number, where EMPNO equal to @EMPNO.
Correct. That would be the way in which you write the update query. So update employees set name equal to @name, comma, basic equal to @basic, comma, department number equal to @department number, where employee number equal to @employee number. So you would have 4 parameters. The 4 parameters would be added in the same way. And to run the query, what would you do again? Again, do what? Execute non-query. So the only change that you're writing in this code would be, instead of insert employee, this would be
Update employee.
Update employee. Other than that, all the code would be the same, identical code. Only your, in the stored procedure, your update statement would be different. Could somebody give me the code for delete, please? Give me the code for delete.
Delete from employees where EMPNO is equal to @EMPNO.
Perfect. How many parameters would that have? Only one.
One.
So you won't need these other parameters, but you need only one parameter. And of course, I'm asking you to do it with stored procedures. So I have not said that, but that I have told you right now that whatever you're doing now should be with stored procedures. Okay, so I'm not doing that. You have to do that, and you have to practice this. Are we clear on this so far? Questions, if any? All right. So we've seen how to call insert, update, or delete with a SQL command. Let's try something else out here. There are other options with the SQL command that you can try. If you wanted to return a single value only, if your query was returning a single value, then you need not go further down. You can call it with SQL command itself. So give me an example of any query that is returning a single value. Give me the query itself based on the tables that we have. Any query that returns a single value, one value only, one value.
Select star from employees where
Select star is giving you multiple columns.
Select EMP name from employee.
I want one column, one row, one column, one value only.
Select EMP name from employee where EMP number equal to @EMP number.
Correct. So in this case, select name from employees where employee number equal to some value. Now this would return to you a single value. All right, correct. Any other query? Give me another example. Now don't give me another column name, okay? Give me a different query, any other query. Returning a single value.
Select max basic from employee.
Correct. So you're saying select max of basic from employee. So what is this returning? This is also returning a single value, one row, one column. So in fact, all your aggregate queries, select max, min, select count, select sum, select average, whatever. All of these typically return a single value. So if you had queries returning a single value, one row, one column only. I'm not even talking about multiple rows, or I'm not even talking about multiple columns in one row. If you got a query that returns one row, one column, then let's see how we can call that query. So what I'll do here is I'll just copy paste from here. right, let's make a few changes. Instead of CMD insert, let me call this CMD, let's say select. And not that it makes a difference, but just so that I can tell you what it is. All right. So I'm selecting count here in this case. Select count star from employees. All right. So if you have this query, if this is the query that you're returning out here. Now to return this query, you will no longer use command.execute non-query. Okay, command.execute non-query was used for what type of queries?
With no returns value.
Which didn't return a value. What does command.execute non-query return? It only returns number of rows affected. The query returning something cannot be picked up. It is only returning how many rows are affected by that. Now here in this case, if your query is returning a single value, you have another method here called execute scalar. An execute scalar, as the name suggests, scalar is one single value. So it executes the query and returns the first column of the first row. Right? First column of the first row. Now see what does execute scalar return here on the left hand side. What does it return?
Object.
Okay, so why object? Why does it return an object? Why do you think it returns an object? It's returning one row, one column. So why return an object?
So to get the flexibility of returning anything.
Correct. Because this can return any data type. It could return a string or an integer or any other data type. So in this case, on my left hand side, I would receive it as this object, whatever, let's say return value is equal to so and so. And this is what execute scalar. Okay. Then of course I could print the return value. So in this case, there's no conversion required because console.writeLine is converting into a string. But this is what you are getting out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? Let's try running this code. So query returning a single value. This doesn't need an employee as a parameter. Right? And this would actually print the value. Let's try running this. Okay. So 7 was the number of records that I have inserted. Okay. Now, what if instead of saying select count star, what if I had given my query as select star? How many rows and columns would this return? Select star from employees, what will this return? How many rows and how many columns?
One row, all column.
No, select star will return what? What does the select star query return?
All rows.
All rows.
Content in the
All
table.
rows and all columns. So if I had 7 rows are going to be returned, and if I had 4 columns, then 4 columns will be returned. But when you use execute scalar, it cannot read all the values. It will only read the value that is being returned in the first row, first column. It will only return the value in where? In the first row, first column. So if you are using this, what will be the return value now? What would it give print now?
Employee number 1.
Employee number
First
1.
row.
The employee of the first record. And I have given that as employee 1. So that would be what would be returned out here. So it doesn't give you an error, but it does not return all the values out here. It's only returning the topmost column, topmost first row, first column. Are we clear on this? All right. So what if you wanted to read multiple rows? What if you wanted to read multiple rows? In this case, you cannot just be reading with the SQL command. What would you need to introduce now? What other object would you need to have?
SQL data.
SQL data reader.
SQL data reader. So the SQL data reader would allow you to read the records. Okay. Now, remember the characteristics of SQL data reader that we talked about yesterday, 3 main characteristics, and all the code that we write is, is written in a particular way because of these 3 characteristics. The fact that it's connected, read only, and forward only. Let's try creating this. So I'll just again copy paste some of my code. And okay. So this now again changes to what? Select staff from employees. All right. When you call this now, you would no longer be using execute scalar. Instead, with the command object, you have a method called as execute reader. And execute reader returns a data reader. So SQL execute reader is returning for you a SQL data reader. All right. So this is what you're doing. You're not going to do new so and so. You're going to call it with the command object. Now, supposing I ran this command. Supposing I said select staff from employees. What would I get out here? What would I get if I ran this command? Select staff from employees. What would I get out here? Yes.
7 rows, 4 columns.
All these rows. Right? All these rows. So let me just paste this out here. And here, of course, this is your end of file. There's no other record out here. Okay. To keep it simple, I'll just keep 3 rows. Okay. Because what works with 3 rows will work with multiple rows as well. So this is what we have. So now, how did we get this statement? We have written code in here which said what? Select staff from employees, and then we are calling execute reader and returning it into a data reader. Now the data reader, you can think of it this way, has a record pointer. Okay. Now this initially, points to the beginning of the records here. It will not read anything out here. So you can't read anything right now. To read the value, to read the first row, you need to give a dr.read. What is dr here? What dr that I'm talking about?
Data reader.
SQL reader object.
SQL data reader object. So this is a method called dr.read, which returns either a true or a false. Which returns a true or a false. Now, when would it return true? If it could read a record. If it could read a record. Right now, after giving this, the record has been read. So could it read a record? Was it able to read a record? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So if it reads the record, the return value is true. But if it could not read a record, the return value is false. So at this point, will it be a true or a false?
True.
True. All right. Now the record that you've just read, to access the record, to get the values from the record, you would get them in this manner. You would say dr of either 0 or dr of column name. The 0 there is the name number of the column. So the 0 refers to what? The
Column
first
number.
column out there. Or you can refer to it by its name. Which would be a better syntax?
Second one.
Second.
Second one. Because here, in the first case, you are not sure what is the column number 0. In this case, you are sure that you want this particular column. So this is what gives you the value in there. Similarly, if I had to read this value, if I had to read Shiv Kumar, then this would have been dr of either 1 or dr of name. So the column name that you're giving out here. So that's how you're reading the value. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. Now, how do I read the next record? To read the next record, again give a dr.read. Right? Again give a dr.read. So now, would this return a true or a false?
True.
True.
True again. And the value that you had can be read in this way, whatever record that you had, in the same way that you would read this. Okay. I try reading this again. I try reading this again. I give a dr.read. Now, would this be true or false?
True.
Yeah.
True.
Agree, everybody? True?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Because the record was read. So again, here also true. And this is how you would get the values. Now, if I try reading this, at this point, what is going to happen? If I give a fourth dr.read,
False.
False.
this would be a false. So now, how do you read through all the records? If you look at this, this is actually a loop. And how many times is this running, or how long will this loop run? As long as it keeps returning true. The moment it returns false, you exit the loop. So it's actually a while loop that you're running and go through all the records. Are we clear on this, everybody? So that's the code that you'll write for a data reader. After I have read this record, supposing I had read the first record, or let's say I've read the second record. How do I go back and read the first record?
No.
How do I go back and read the first record?
No.
It
won't
won't
be
be
Not
possible.
possible.
It won't be possible.
Yeah. So that's what we were talking about yesterday, wherein we said that this is a forward only thing. Once you've gone past that record, you can't go back to the previous record. Secondly, after you have read the value, you can't change the value here. I can't say equal to 20 or equal to 10. I can't do this. This is not allowed. Why is this not allowed?
This is only
Read
read
only.
Read only.
This is a read-only value. So these are the characteristics of a data reader. Third thing that we had said was it needs to be connected. Meaning what? When the data reader is open, the connection needs to be kept open. If the connection is not available, then the data reader will not be able to read a record. What connection are we talking about? The data reader is connected to the command, and command is connected to the connection. Which line in the data reader says that it's connected to this command? Which line in the data reader code says that it's connected to the command?
180. Line 180.
184. 184. Look at this. How did you get the data reader? What did you do to get the data reader? Yeah. Command dot execute reader. So it's using this command. And where does the command say that it's connected to the connection? That is line 180.
That is 180.
So command dot connection is here. So the data reader is actually using this connection. And this connection needs to be kept open. If it is not open, it will not work. Let's try writing code for that. Let's see what we have done in the code. And all that we're doing here is what? Calling dr.read in a loop to read the values. And this is how you're reading the values. So help me with the code, please. Call out the code. While what?
dr.read.
dr.read.
Right. And if I want to display a value, what would I do?
Console.read line.
Yeah. What? I
dr.
want to show the names, let's say. So dr
dr of name.
Braces.
name, alternate syntax. Alternate syntax. Instead of dr dot name, what is the other way in which you could have done this?
One.
dr of
Layer of
2.
one.
No,
Dr
1.
of 1.
One.
Column number 2, but starting with 0. So 0, 1, whatever. So both of these would work, but line number 188 would be the preferred way of doing it. Very important. After you finish reading the data reader, you need to close it. And we'll see later why it's important to close it. But this is what we are doing out here. Right? Let's try running this. All that this is doing is showing me all the names from the database, one after the other. I have not called that code. I need to call that code. Let's try running this. And these are the names that you had in your database. Are we clear on this? Everything? Questions, if any?
So can't we read the entire row, like here in line number
Yes, you can.
188?
You can. Individually, you can read dr of name, dr of whatever.
No single comment.
You can't, even if you read the single row, you'll have to read it into somewhere and then get the value. So dr of something is anyway giving you that directly.
Okay.
Even if you do manage to read it into something, you will still need to read the value from that something. Correct or no?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So this is like an array which contains all the values out there. All right. Now, the data reader or the SQL data reader has the ability of reading more than one set of records. So let me show you what I mean by that. Supposing I've given a command like this. Now this is possible in SQL Server. I'm doing what? Giving multiple commands separated by a semicolon. So when I run this, you'll find that now you're getting what? Look at this. What are you getting here? You're getting two sets of outputs. It's not just one set of output. You're getting two sets of outputs. So if I just copy this and this is how it is. This is the output. Ignore the US for now. This is the output that you're actually seeing out here. Okay. Now, what if I have a situation like this and I wanted to read both the values? How would this work? First thing, let me change my statement and also include select staff from departments. All right. Now, when you loop through the records, out here, this only loops through the first set of records. It would not read the second set of records. This loop here is only looping through the first set of records. So you're getting the employees. Now, if you'd like to read the next set of records, the data reader has a method called as next result. And what would next result again return? Next result will return either a true or a false. So if there was a next result out there, it returns a true. If the next result was not there, then it returns a false. Now, once I do this next result, your record pointer now is at the beginning of the next set of results. And how do I read the values again from there? Help me read the departments. What would I do to read that again? How do I read the values again?
Same
Yes.
dr dot read.
dir.read. So similar code to what we have out here. And instead of name, this is department name. So let me just give a console.write line in between this to distinguish between the employees and the departments. Let's try running this. Okay, I still need to call that. I have not called that. Clear? Questions, if any? All right. Okay, I'm just going to copy paste some code from my existing thing just to all right, so I've just copy pasted some code out here, which I'd like to show you all. And let me also run the code and show you what's happening there. Okay.
So,
Look through the, yeah.
sir, in the previous program,
Mhm.
dr.next result, we said it's returning true or false, but we are not checking it, no? Like,
No, we're not, but you can. Like, for
Yeah.
example, you can have an outer loop,
hmm.
okay, which is a post-tested loop, which could be calling dr.next result. So at the end of reading the first, you do a next result. And if that
While
returns
loop.
true, then go back and do that again. And then in that case, you won't use the, you may not want to use the names of the columns. You might want to use the
Number.
actual number of the column, but you could do that. So I have not done that, but possibility exists of having a nested loop like that.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So look at the code that I have written here. Just take a minute to understand this code and tell me what I'm trying to do out here. I'll take you through some of the code. What is the first one doing? dr cmd departments. The command takes this, select star from departments, and then I call execute reader out here. So what is this going to do? What is dr departments going to have now?
Data from departments table.
Right, which I'm reading. So while dr departments.read, this is my loop out here. And what am I displaying here?
Department name from department table.
Department name. Now, after showing the department name, check out what I'm doing as a nested loop. See whether you can understand what I'm doing out here.
Join.
All right. What is this highlighted section of the code trying to do?
Printing the name of all employees from that same department.
Correct. So I'm now filtering out. I'm saying that for this department number, for the current department number, pick up all the employees, right? Create a second data reader. Create a second data reader, which is having those employee details for that particular department. And then I'm showing what? Showing all the employees in that department. So my output would be something like this: key department number 10, then all the employees of that department. Then department number 20, then all the employees in that department. So I'm trying to write code like this. Okay. And I'll call this function now from main. I'm calling that function. And let me run this code and show you what happens when I run this code. So if I run this code now, I don't know that you saw the output, but it gave me the output of the first,
Department.
department name. It showed me that sales. And after showing me that, it says system.invalid operation. Now the error message that it shows, ignore that, because it is not the correct explanation. So the problem happened if one data reader was open and you tried to fetch anything else while that data reader was open, it causes you a problem. Okay, now why does it cause you a problem? It causes you a problem because the data reader places an exclusive lock on the connection. So while the data reader is open, you cannot use that same connection for any other code. While the data reader is reading the values, you cannot use that connection for any other code. The data reader places a lock on it, which is why in my previous code, what was I asking you all to do? What was I asking you all to do?
Closing data reader.
As soon as you finish working with the data reader, close it, so that it will now no longer have a lock on that connection. Okay, this is what I've done. But now in this case, the option is unavoidable, because while one data reader is open, I want to read the values from the second one. Now, by default, SQL Server does not allow that. If you want to allow that, you have to specify in the connection string, you have to give in this setting called multiple active result sets equal to true. So in the connection string, what I have also added out here, an additional entry here which says multiple active result sets equal to true. When you do this, the data reader no longer places an exclusive lock on the connection, and you can use a second data reader while the first is still open. So just by doing this, adding this line in my connection string, just by adding this is what effect you're getting. Something called as multiple active result sets, or in short, if you look at the acronym, that is MARS. Okay, MERS. So let's try running the same code. And this works now. So what is it showing me? Department sales, these are the employees. Department IT, these are the employees, and marketing doesn't have anybody. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any?
Is there any limit on this multiple active result?
No. All right. So that's the only change that I made out here in the connection string. All right, let's try something else out here. I'm again pausing it for a second. And I copy paste some code to help get me.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So if you don't close that connection, will it give us any error at the end?
If you don't close the connection, it will not give you an error. But at some point, if your connections are kept open, you will exceed the maximum number of open connections that you can have. So on a web server, it will be disastrous because you'll have multiple clients connecting to your database. And if you're opening the connection but not closing it, that would cause you a problem, not in the code, but because now you have exceeded the maximum number of open connections that you can have. Okay. All right, let's try one more concept related to this, to opening a connection. And just give me a minute while I type out the code and keep it ready and work with this. All right. Okay, now consider this situation. Right now, I'm putting all the code into one place only. I'm calling all the code out here only. But you might have a situation wherein, for reusable code, you might put this code of returning a data reader in a different class maybe. Okay, you might have a common class where common operations like this are being performed. So where you pass it a connection, you pass it the connection string, you pass it the command text, and it creates the code for returning a data reader for you. So if you had situations where you wanted to create reusable code, now in such a case, you might want to do this. You might want to have a function that returns a data reader. All right, and you'll be calling this out here. So what is this code doing? Look at line number 282. What is this doing simply? All that I'm doing is what? Calling that function get data reader. And all the code for creating the data reader and for creating the command and creating the connection, all of that code is written in the get data reader method. So you get reusable code that way. So what if I had a situation like this, wherein a function is returning a data reader? Are you getting the situation that I'm talking about? A function returning a data reader. Now, in such a case, see what code I'm writing. So I'm saying, this is my select staff from employees. And after doing this, I call a execute reader. And then I return the data reader. If you look at this code, can you identify what could be possibly going wrong in this code?
Closing the connection.
Sir, we are closing connection and then we are returning.
Correct. So the problem here is this line number 303. The moment I say connection dot close, my data reader will not work. Why?
We have lost the connection.
So why will data reader not work? Because the data reader is a dash object. Is a connected object.
Okay.
3 keywords I gave you: connected, read only, and forward only, which means that the connection has to be kept open. So if I try calling this code now, if I try calling this code out here, it would cause me a problem. So I'm calling that call function returning a data reader. And if I did this, it will give you an error saying that the invalid attempt to call read when the reader is closed. Now it's not the reader which is closed. What is actually closed is what?
Connection.
The connection is closed. So this is what the problem is. Now if I remove that line of code, it will work fine. If I remove this line of code, it will work fine. If I don't close the connection, it will work fine. So if I run this code now, this works fine. But if I don't close the connection, what is the other problem that I'm faced with? If I don't close the connection, what is the other problem that I'm faced with? Somebody asked me a question just before this. What is the other issue if I don't close the connection?
At some point of time, we will exceed maximum limit of open connections.
Correct. At some point, you will run out of the number of open connections that you can have if you're not closing your connections, and your code will crash then for that. So it's basically like a ticking time bomb, waiting for some time, and later your code will crash. Here it will not happen. Even when you're trying your code, when you're trying it in the development mode, nothing will go wrong because you're opening only one connection. But the moment you deploy it, you will get complaints saying that this is the error that you're getting. So how do we solve this problem? If you check in the next situation, you can't close the connection because the data reader needs it. And you can't leave it open because you will need to close it at some point. So how do you handle this situation? Now to handle this situation, we're going to write code in a slightly different way. Now with the data reader, there's an overload when creating it, and which takes something called as command behavior as a parameter. It takes a command behavior as a parameter. Now the command behavior, there are multiple values to it. The one that I'm using here is close connection. What this line says is that as soon as the data reader is closed, close the connection also. What is this line saying now? As soon as you finish working with the data reader and the data reader is closed, then automatically go and do what? Also close the
Connection.
yes, connection behind that. So I don't need to give in this line now here. This line will not come in here. I'll leave my connection open. Now where would the connection be closed? Where would the connection be closed? On which line will the connection get closed?
287.
287. So as soon as I close the data reader, my connection also will get closed. Are we clear on this? Right, now to show you how this is working, I'll just move this. I don't want to do this, but I'll just move this to this level. And right, why am I moving it here? Why am I moving it here? Why am I moving it here? Just to show you the connection state here. So first thing is, let's try writing code in this manner with execute reader. I'm not giving command behavior dot close connection. And if I close the data reader, let me print the value of cn dot state. Remember cn dot state, right at the beginning we had given that. It tells you what is the state of the current connection.
Connection state.
Okay, so I'm just printing this. So right now what have I done? I've just run it like normally. I have not closed the connection. And when I try running this code now, okay, so look at this line. Connection here is kept as open, right? Connection is currently open, and which we don't want. So what do we do here instead? What do we do here instead? While opening the data reader, give command behavior dot close connection. Now, as soon as I close the data reader, what will happen to the connection? That state also will be, connection also will be closed out here. So let's try running this, and you'll find that now the connection is in a closed state. Are we clear on this? All right. So To do that, I had actually moved the connection here, but I'm moving it back inside my code. All right. Don't use both. Use only one of the two. I've just given you the others to check out how it's working. Are we clear on what we have done so far? नहीं दिख रहा ऑप्शन कहीं वो.
Sorry, sir, it was not meant for everyone.
Then whom was it meant for? Yes.
So actually, somebody was asking me regarding this SQL query too. That's why.
So how does Kaustubh know the answer? Ask me the question. Kaustubh is also, no, you're right. Every day in the evening after the session, I call up Kaustubh and I explain to him what is going to happen in the session the next day. So yes, maybe he does know the answer. Galti se mistake. So what is, I mean, we have gone mad trying to tell you all that please communicate in English. So why you all still communicating in Hindi? Beach me. Later, when you all try asking me questions, not Kaustubh necessarily, but others. I'm not pointing out individually. But there you stutter and there you're not able to form grammatically correct English sentences. You're not able to do that. Let me tell you the truth. Horrible English. Horrible. Your coding might be okay. Horrible English. I'm not even able to understand what you're trying to ask me sometimes. And this is because you all are not used to communicating in English. So when are you going to learn? I mean, people have gone mad trying to tell you, but you all still don't want to improve. What can we do? You're digging your own graves. I mean, if I was an English teacher, I would have come to your house and done something to you there. The way you are murdering English. Okay. All right, back here. Moving away from data readers. We have, you've tried out a couple of concepts with data readers. We're moving away from data readers. And what we're going to do next is look at transactions out here in our code. So transactions involve running multiple commands together as one unit. Now, they might be related commands and they might be part of a set of commands that you want to work either together or not work at all. So typical example that we generally give when you are talking about transactions is, let's say, a bank transfer from one account to the other account. So when you do a bank transfer from one account to the other account, one account is first debited the amount and second account is then credited in the account. So that's what transfer involves. Now, what could go wrong? What could be the possible things that might happen? Let's say, I am transferring money to, let's say, whoever, let's say Kaustubh's account. So first possibility could be that both work fine. My debit happens and his credit happens, and then that should work fine. No problem, absolutely. Another possibility could exist that I don't have enough money in my account. So my debit didn't happen. Now, if my debit didn't happen, should the credit happen in his account? Yeah.
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right. Or the other possibility, let's say, for example, the debit happened in my account. All right. So my account got debited, but his account number while given this thing was a wrong account number, or maybe his account was suspended temporarily for speaking in Hindi. All right. So his account has been suspended. Now, in such a case, my account has already got debited, but his account didn't get credited. So again, what should happen now in this case? My account should be rolled back to the previous state. So what we're trying to do is I'm trying to show you how you can have multiple commands run together in a single transaction. You have a class called SQL transaction that you can use out here and run that. So let me show you this again. I've got a ready example, so I'm not going to type out the code. Okay, so I have two values out here. I have two commands out here. Command 1 and command 2. Command 1 and command 2. Right? I'm purposely giving in the wrong value in command 2 to begin with. I'm purposely giving that. So what's going to happen is command 1 will work fine, but command 2 does not work fine because of why is it not working fine here in this case? What is the issue here?
Primary key.
Primary key.
Violation. So when I try executing both the commands, by default, one command will work, but the second one will not. Okay, one command will work, but the second one will not. So let me remove all the code for my transactions and show you what is happening there. All right. Let me remove all the code out here. Sorry. So what happens here now is the first one works, second one does not work. First execute non-query will work, second one gives you an error. When it gives you an error, it's showing you the error message out here. But in the database, what would have happened?
First command will be successfully executed.
First command will be inserted into the database. So let me show you the database right now. Right, just to show you, initially, I don't have employee number 10. But when I run this code, and I'm calling this code as transactions, when I run this code, let's see how this works. Right? So the second record gave a violation of primary key constraint. Okay. But in my database, one record has already gone. Okay, that one record for which has worked. This is without transactions. Now I don't want this to happen. I want a all or nothing commit. Either both should work, or if both don't work, then whatever commands have been inserted, those should be rolled back. If both work, then they should be committed. Okay, I'll delete that row. I've deleted that row again, and let's try the same thing. So I'll go back to my code that I had written down here. And let's see the code that we have out here. To begin with, you need to call a begin transaction with the connection. You call a begin transaction with the connection. The moment you call a begin transaction with the connection, any command that is using this connection must compulsorily be run in the transaction. I'll repeat. The moment you call cn.begin transaction, then any command that is using this connection must compulsorily participate in the transaction. So to do that, you need to write one extra line here, which says what? Command dot transaction equal to the transaction object that we have created out here. This transaction object T is what we are passing to it out. If I don't do this, when you're in the lab, you can try doing this. If I don't do this, it will give you an error saying that you're not initialized the transaction property. Second thing that I've done again here is what? For the second command, again done what? Same line of code. Command 2 dot transaction is equal to the transaction that we have on top. Right? Your remaining code remains exactly the same. You try running your code. And if everything was successful, see if it gave an exception, what will happen now? If any of this code gave an exception, to jump into the catch. But if there were no exceptions, that means everything was successful. Then what do I do in this case?
Committed the transaction.
Commit the transaction. And if either of the two commands gave an error, if any of the commands, supposing now I've written only 2, you could have multiple commands, 5, 6, 7, how many you wanted, you could do that. If any of the commands gave an error, then go into the catch block and do a rollback. So it will roll back all the pending changes. Are we clear on this, everybody? End of it, of course, you could have put this into a finally. I have not done that, but in the end, in any case, do a cn dot close. So let's try running this. I'll insert employee number 10 should work and employee number 1 should not work. I already have an employee number 1. In this case, this should do a rollback, violation of primary key constraint on the second one. Let's try running this. Oh, I'm sorry, I have not called that code again. I uncommented, I undid the changes. No, I didn't undo the changes. I undid the changes. So transactions is what I'm calling out here. And let's try running the same code again. So in this case, the rollback happened because of the second one giving an error. Now I'm very interested in seeing whether the first one has gone into the database or not. Because the first one didn't give an error. So if you look at the Object Explorer now, and you will notice that the first one has not been inserted into the database because of the rollback that happened. Of course, if the values were correct, if these values were 10 and 20, and both of them were correct, then what would happen now in this case? A commit. So both of these should then get inserted into the database. Right? So commit and then check out the values here. Right? 10 and 20 have been inserted. Are we clear on this, everybody? I'll delete that again so that if I have to run it again, I can check it out. Questions, if any? All right. I have taken what I wanted to take with you all in this session. We have finished about 15-20 minutes before the scheduled time in any case. So I don't want to take up the next section unless you try this part out. Okay, so I would like to take a break at this time. Today's session, we have got class, lab, then again post-lunch, class and lab again. So you all have to now move into the lab. Okay, you have a 20-minute break. 11 o'clock, you'll start with the lab. 11 to 1 is your lab time. Try these things out in the lab, including the to-dos that I've asked you to do. Okay, so I'll copy paste the code into your shared folder. Give me 2 minutes to do that. I've asked you all to try out this with, even with what? Somewhere there was a to-do.
Stored procedure.
Update daily.
Yeah. So this is the one that I had asked you to do. So make sure you're trying this out. And we will meet back again post lunch and work with this. I have a doctor's appointment again. Yesterday evening also I had gone to the doc. I have a doctor's appointment again today. So I will be back. Hopefully by 12 I should be back. So in case there are any errors, then I'll connect back at around 12 o'clock and I will join back with you. But otherwise, all the best. Happy coding.
So
Yes.
can you please show again how you got that connection string?
Open this database that you had created yesterday. Open it. Don't just keep it closed. Open it. Right click and properties. In the properties, there will be a property called a connection string. This one here. Okay.
So what if we are not getting this an elaborate property window? It is just showing 2 or 3 columns in 2 or 3 rows.
What did I tell you? Open it. Do not keep it closed.
Hmm.
If you keep it closed and if you see the properties, you may not get to see it.
Okay,
Open
sir.
it and then right click in properties. It would
Okay,
show
sir.
it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. So I'll just copy paste the code. 11 o'clock, you'll start off with your labs. All right. Bye for now.
Yes, sir.